Donald Trump's social media platform hit 1 million downloads this week. Global ratings are about to hit a new milestone, and news is all about opinions. That and more in this week's episode, so stay tuned. Welcome to a brand new episode of This Week in Apps. I'm Ariel from App Figures, and here are 5 things you need to know from the world of mobile apps and games for this week. Donald Trump has officially joined the social media platform race this week with the public rollout of his platform, Truth Social. The app, which, as you can imagine, draws a lot from Twitter, finally opened up to the public this week. And here's the thing, it immediately appeared in the #1 spot in the US App Store. Seeing that, you might think it's super hot, but it actually achieved that success thanks to pre-orders, a feature of the App Store that allows users to subscribe to have new apps automatically downloaded when they're released. And by doing that, Truth Social was able to collect downloads over a long period of time and then have a big splash on day one. It's not the first app to use this strategy, and it's a really good strategy, so if you're thinking of launching a new app, you might want to consider this. The app spent most of the week in the top spot, first thanks to those pre-orders, and then thanks to just a wild amount of news coverage it received. But as of Friday morning, it's lost its top spot and dropped to #4. Because there is no Android version, a clone made its way to the top of Google Play earlier in the week. However, it's been pulled since. Now, let's talk downloads. We estimate that in its first week in the App Store, and that's between Monday and Friday, Truth Social was downloaded more than 1 million times. I was curious to see how that compared to downloads of similar platforms, so I compared the total downloads of Truth Social, Getter, Rumble, and the original Parler. And to make the comparison fair, I limited the data to the US App Store, and that's because it's only available in the US App Store. No Android component, no international coverage. Truth Social ranked 3rd in the list of all-time downloads, which is led by Parler with more than 3.5 million downloads. And if you're thinking, where are all these Parler downloads from the last few years? Those came from Android devices and from other countries, which are things we're ignoring in this comparison. Getter is in a very similar boat. The marketer in me questions the decision to focus on the App Store first, but politics make little sense, so I'm not going to continue that thought at all. I'm very curious to see who will be using this app in the long term. Its description, which calls the app's approach a big tent approach, not something I necessarily understand, makes it clear that the creators wanted diversity and not to become a silo like those other attempts at competing with Twitter. But is that even possible at this point? With so much happening in the news this week, I had to look to see if the trend we've seen in the last few years with news apps continued. The trend is that more users download news aggregation apps like Newsbreak and Smart News in times of unrest than apps from news networks like CNN and Fox. And the theory was that people want to see different ways of how a story is covered to really understand it. But surprisingly, aggregators aren't in the lead today. Downloads of CNN and Fox's flagship news apps have increased over the last 48 hours so much that it pushed them above news aggregation apps in their category, and news aggregation apps were in the lead almost always. On Friday morning, CNN was the 3rd most popular app in the news category in the US App Store, and Fox was right behind it in 4th place. Popular aggregators Newsbreak and Smart News are currently ranked 5th and 8th, respectively. Why is this? It's hard to tell. I think it's maybe a sign of the times we're in, and how news, just like every other piece of content out there, is just opinionated. And aggregators kind of skip that whole opinionated step by offering multiple points of view. But ranked above both networks and aggregators are Twitter and Reddit in the news category. The aggregators of aggregators, if you think about it this way. And what differentiates those two is that they're opinionated aggregators. I hope you see the pattern here. I was surprised to see news apps weren't at the top of the App Store and Google Play in Ukraine, given the current situation. But what I found instead makes even more sense these days. Signal, the private messaging app that got a huge boost by Elon Musk last year, is now the most downloaded app in Ukraine. Over the last month, Signal has been climbing the ranks in Ukraine. It was the 150th most downloaded app earlier in the month, and since Monday, it's been inching up the list, first breaking into the top 100 and then top 50, and as of Thursday morning, it was the most downloaded app in Ukraine. It's been there since. I looked over the mobile download index in Ukraine to see what's happening in the App Store in the months leading up to a war, and that's because it's something I don't get to see much of, and that's good. In case you're not familiar, the mobile download index tracks downloads and revenue patterns across countries and categories, and it's available for free to developers. I'll leave a link to it in the description below if you're curious too. The category that's been seeing the most change in the last month is travel. Again, that makes a ton of sense. In the last 30 days, the mobile download index for the travel category grew by more than 80 points a rise of almost 50% from the beginning of the year. The entertainment and social networking categories have also been on the rise in the last 30 days, as both contain apps that enable communication, which is really essential right now. I hope everyone is safe out there. Switching gears completely, I talk about ratings a lot in my keyword teardowns because they've become one of the most important components for App Store optimization. And by the way, if you have any questions about App Store optimization, you should tune into my live stream on Wednesday. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Now, one thing I was very curious about, and the kind I don't get to see when analyzing a single keyword or a single app, is the global volume of ratings. Guess how many times apps and games have been rated since the beginning of the App Store? A lot. Using Explorer, our market intelligence platform, I quickly summed up all the ratings for every app and every game across all the countries. That total is now 14.1 billion. Yep, billion with a B. That's almost twice the world's population. How close was your guess? 70% of ratings came from apps and games on Google Play, which kind of makes sense. The remaining 30% of ratings came from apps and games on the App Store. And a little over 2 billion ratings belong to apps and games that are no longer in the store. But I counted them because they happened at some point. Fun fact that might surprise some of you, the average rating across both stores is 3 stars. But the average of Google Play is 4 stars, and the average on the App Store is a little under 2 stars. And no, I didn't get these confused, I promise. I'm going to dig into why that is in a future video, but I suspect the higher average on Google Play is a result of having many more apps that don't have a single rating, which I excluded from my average calculation, versus the App Store where it's much easier to get a few ratings and those bring the average down a lot. Now, thanks to additions from both Apple and Google that enable developers to easily ask their users to provide a rating, I only see this total growing faster. I only see stores relying on it more and more and more for discovery, App Store optimization, and I see it as a means for consumers to rely on it to understand what's popular. If you have an app in the App Store or a game, you need to work on getting more ratings to stay competitive. And that's all I have for you this week. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you like this video, consider subscribing. I publish a new one every week. So I'll see you next week. And if you'd like to see the highest earning apps and games, check out last week's episode.